For the next 4 or 5 months, we're going to be hearing continual conversations about the constitutional change required to give First Nations people a voice. Now, we need to recognise that this is simply about them having to be recognised within the Constitution. What happens beyond that gets decided by Parliament. So the first stage is for recognition within the Constitution. Now that should not be all that hard for people to understand. Very simple. These people were here long before we were, some 60,000 years in fact before we were. And it was their land which we took from them. We, our ancestors, Captain Cook, Prince Philip, Captain Philip, all those dudes, they arrived and they decided that they were going to take it over and dump a whole lot of riffraff from the UK here in Australia because they didn't want them over there. Their jails were too crowded. Sad for them. So here we were, lumbered here, and we chose to treat Indigenous people in the worst possible ways. We massacred them. We brought in diseases which killed them off, and sometimes intentionally. We provided those diseases to them so that we would kill them off. We removed their children. We've done everything we can in order for Indigenous people to become white. And at every possible level, it was wrong. It was wrong. And we need to find ways to better understand what it is that we did. And we need to have a look at that history and perhaps realise that there were many infractions on just human rights that our ancestors did because they believed at that particular time they thought it was the right thing to do. But we know now that it wasn't, and that many of those policies have been extended right through to the 20th century. And when we think about the fact that it wasn't until 1967 that we decided that Indigenous people at least deserved the right to vote. It's horrific. That's well within my lifetime. We've treated Indigenous people extremely poorly, and we need to find ways to make amends. So in this clip I'm about to show you, which is Sky News wanting to provide as much division as they can, because for their reasons, which I do not understand, even though they've endeavoured to explain it to us on many occasions, all they want to do is pick out those people that they believe are the more radical version of what constitutional recognition of Indigenous people actually means. And they've got an interview here with I think it's Mabo, but it's an interesting interview because there's not much I disagree with what he says in these clips. I disagree with Morrow because he's just an odd individual who's declaring the Murdoch line around Indigenous Australians. And the notion that if you take the no position, you're racist, is really a good argument, because I think if you're taking the no position, you are racist. It's as simple as that. And these guys show their racism, their sense of lack of understanding, I guess, around what life has been for Indigenous people. And so I'll play this clip, and we'll talk about it as we go through it. There he is, looking his best, in the only way he should look.
But first, The Voice. Today, the Senate passed legislation to allow the referendum to embed a race-based consultation body into our Constitution to go ahead. Yes, supporters tried to sell this as a historic moment, the day when the campaign...
That's racism in itself, a race-based policy. It is not a race-based policy. There are other policies and other recognition of Indigenous people, the Racial Discrimination Act, and a whole host of other stuff that that we've adopted over the years. So the idea of race not being present in our current legal framework is just untrue. That this is not about creating a racial barrier. This is actually about creating equity and fairness for the most disadvantaged group in our community. And for him to call it race-based is just, it's a trope.
For The Voice kicked off in earnest, as opposed to the stealth campaign we have seen on our screen for weeks now, you know, the ones where the government is just giving us information. But you know what? I didn't see history made today. Instead, I saw the moment when the cracks that underpin the politics of The Voice finally came out in the open for all to see. Now, from the start, Anthony Albanese has been clear that he thinks The Voice is no big deal. You know, just a nice thing to do.
Now, the point to make here is that it isn't that big a deal. It is these people, people like Morrow and others on this network, that are doing their damnedest to make it an issue.
What it will take is people of goodwill to recognise that this is just about good manners. It's about First Nations people being consulted about matters that affect them. Now, that's the way I was brought up. It's just what we should do as good human beings and good citizens with each other.
And the question I ask is, why can't other people just accept that this is all that it is? Well, the way Albo has explained it is simply the way it is.
But from the start, it has been obvious that while voice activists have said one thing to the broader community in private or among supporters, the vision has been very different. Have a look at this. Video of Thomas Mayo, the union official and self-described militant who wrote the book.
So here they go. So what they're doing now is there are varying views. No one's going to deny that. But what Mayo talks about here is a different set of issues that need to be resolved, and we need to come to terms with them at some point. As radical as they are ideas that we need to confront as a society. But this has got nothing to do with The Voice per se.
On the proposed constitutional change. Let's see what Mayo, who sat on the PM's referendum working group, has to say, shall we?
And John Howard, that bastard, he took away a voice.
He did.
And we've called for a voice so many times in the past because we know Black Lives Matter and we know we need to make them listen.
You know, this is the first step. It's a vital step and it puts all the explanation behind it. Like, you know, pay the rent, for example. You know, how do we do that in a way that is transparent and that it actually sees reparations and compensation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people beyond what we say and do at a rally? Because I know...
Can I just say that reparation and the stuff about paying the rent, these are other issues that he's talking about. This is not specifically about The Voice. But what's happening here is that Morrow is making this stuff that Mayo's talking about, is making it about The Voice, and that's disingenuous and it's completely dishonest, actually.
I know you comrades that are listening today will continue to support our struggle, and you are an important part of the struggle, just like our communist elders have been an important part of our struggle.
The power in The Voice, campaign for that and punish politicians that ignore our advice. That is where the power comes from.
So, let's get this straight according to Thomas Mayo. John Howard is a bastard.
Yep.
White Australia needs to pay the rent. Communist elders would presumably be smiling down upon this whole endeavor. And those who think differently will be punished. This, frankly, to me confirms something that has long been clear about The Voice. Namely, that it is at heart a Marxist project that seeks to use race rather than class to pit us against one another and usurp our...
So if someone has a radical view, as Mayo does, then that becomes about pitting people against each other. No, it doesn't. It is simply a radical view. We don't have to agree with that specific view of what this means. He's an activist and he's radical. Okay, fine. He's entitled to his view. That doesn't mean that those views are going to be activated as a result of The Voice. So a lot of what the Fox News, the Sky News people want to try and convey to us is the sense of division by going to these extremes and saying that this is what The Voice is about. This is not what The Voice is about. This is their attempt to confuse and to disseminate disinformation about The Voice and how it will impact all of us. This is a lie, and we must call it out. If you like my content, could you please subscribe to my channel? And if you'd like to make a comment below, I'll be more than happy to respond to that as well. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.